Well, it's kind of interesting because this past Tuesday night it was right funny because I walked out and I made the joke. And if you wasn't able to listen to Brother Scott Tuesday night, go back and listen to it. He done a really good job. And I laughed as I was walking out. I said, I'm gonna take a combination of what everybody's been preaching here lately, and I'm gonna build one big, nice message, and I'm gonna preach it. And I made that joke because, as Brother Ralph points out all the time, it's not that somebody's taking your message, but people are confirming your message. And then this morning he got up and started preaching about weight, and I said, okay, I think we're good. Either we all on the same page, or we're all going in the wrong direction together. Either way, we're all together, you know. But I tell you, here it's probably been about a month ago, and you can ask Sarah. Sarah will vouch for me. About a month ago, I come in. I told Sarah, I said, I got a message. I said, I got a message in my heart. And she said, oh yeah. I said, yeah. And I said, it's about perspective, and it's about our focus. And so help me, she said, yeah, that sounds good. And I gave her some ideas of some stuff that was going on in my head, and she said, that sounds good. I said, yeah. Well, then, it wasn't but like a day or two after that, somebody else popped up, and it's like, hey, they're preaching on perspective, and this was preaching on focus. And like I said, either we're all going in the wrong direction together, or I'm not so far off as I thought I was. But I'm not even kidding you. This has been on my mind for a month, and with that being said, you got to imagine how much time I spend and thought about this particular message and all the things I went through trying to build this message. And it's interesting because most of the time what I've come to discover, and I don't always do it, so I obviously, but what I've come to discover is usually whenever I finally just quit and leave it alone, usually I get the answer I'm looking for and everything's good. But I fought with it, and I went from Genesis, I kid you not, I am not even exaggerating, I literally went from creation all the way to Revelation, and everything in between trying to build this message. And finally, I settled on this one thing. And it's hilarious that I say I settled on it. I didn't settle on it. I was sitting there one day, and God just right on top of my head, and I said, hey, that makes sense. It's funny how God will drop something on you, and you're like, hey, that adds up, you think? And what I was sitting there thinking about is our focus and how easily influenced our focus is. And how we have to be cautious about what we allow to influence our focuses on a day-to-day basis. And there's a lot of places and a lot of ways we could talk about this, but I'll tell you where my mind went. It went to about a year ago. We did an Easter play here about a year ago. One of the biggest productions I've ever been a part of. It was awesome. It was a great time. I loved it. It was all kinds of crazy, but it was all kinds of fun. And I mean, it's true. I mean, Kathy ain't going to, she'll tell you the truth. It is what it is. It was all kinds of crazy, but it was awesome. And I was blessed to be able to play Jesus, and I was in practically every single scene. Now, I promise I'm going somewhere, but I was in practically every scene, but there were certain scenes where I would have to leave. And what I would do was crazy because I would walk out the doors on the left side of the church, and I would come back in on the right side of the church, and I would walk all the way down the entire length of the church. Walk from one end of the church all the way to the other. Now, you could preach this if you really want. I mean, this could be an interesting message. But Jesus walked from the back end of the church to the front of the church, and only a few people noticed. There's a message in that, I'm just saying. But nobody noticed me coming back in the room. I came in that door, walked all the way down, and nobody noticed me but just a handful of people. There was a few people, and it was mostly because there were people in the way. And I would have to back, excuse me, I got it there again. You can preach that. And so I come all the way down, and I would be standing, and the reason why no one noticed me is because there's one individual in a play. Now, everybody, I'm not saying anybody's more important than the next because they're not. Anybody who's ever been a part of a play knows you don't really have anybody who's like, that's the most important person. No, not really. Everybody's dependent on everybody. But there's one person in a play that you never see. You will never see this individual ever during a play. And that's the person running the light. The guy running the light, you will never see him during the play. Now, the props person, if they decide they want to have a part or whatever, sure, they may get thrown in there here and there. But, I mean, all these different people might. But the light guy, he's got his station, and you don't get to see him. And the reason why is because that light person, I promise I'm trying to make a point, so don't run off on me. And I'm going to get to a Bible verse. I promise I'm really getting there. But I need you to see this. The light guy is responsible for making sure the story flows fluently. If the light guy has absolutely no idea what this play is about or who's doing what, when, and where, he may not need to know lines, but he needs to know what's going on because he needs you to be looking over here while I'm coming in over there. And if your focus is on me over here, you're missing what's going on over here. The light guy is very, very important. And the point is how easily influenced just the simple shining of a light causes everyone's focus to zone in on one thing. There's a few people might notice a couple things off the side, but light draws everyone's attention. It makes everyone focus so hard on one spot that they miss everything going on around them. So the question is for one, what is it you are allowing to influence you today? And the next question is what are you shining a light on? What is it we as the light guy in our world, what is it we are shining our lights on? We are the light of the world. Jesus would say this in Matthew chapter 5. You are the light of the world. Paul would write in Ephesians chapter 5 verse 8, for you were once darkness, but now you are light. He's not saying you are a carrier of light. You are light. When you take on the form of, you take on this life, this walk, this salvation, you become light. And therefore, what you shine your light on the most is what people focus on. What are you spending the bulk of your time lighting up in your world and causing people to focus on? And while I went through so many stories, and so many ways to get to this point, I landed on the story of Elijah and Elisha. I landed in 2 Kings chapter 2, the latter part of the story of Elijah and Elisha. Many people are familiar with this, but we're going to go step by step. We're not going to read every single verse, but we're going to cover from verses 1 through 12. I tell you that because if you get curious, or 1 through 14, and you get curious as to where I'm coming from on this, and you want to go back and read it, go back and read it. 2 Kings chapter 2, 1 through 14. Very good, very awesome stuff to read through. But what I want you to see is you have this story of Elijah and Elisha. And you have Elijah has been told by God, way back in 1 Kings, he was told by God to find himself a successor. He needed somebody he could train up to take his place. I point this out for a reason. Because, and I promise we'll get back to the light thing here in a minute. We'll make ourselves full circle here in just a minute. But what I want you to see is that Elijah was given specific direction to find Elisha. It was not coincidence. It wasn't that Elijah was just moping along one day and suddenly, hey, there's a young man over there, looks like he needs somebody to help him. No, this was somebody God set in his life for a reason, because God said, this young man is someone you need to have follow you from this day forward so that someday he can take over doing what you're doing. What we need to know is that a lot of times, guys, God still works this way. God still works this way. God still puts people in your life and in my life that are influences on us, and you are influences on them. You are their light. You are what draws their focus. You are what influences them on a day-to-day basis. If you don't think you have any kind of influence in your world, wake up grumpy one day. Just wake up grumpy and watch how the house changes. Everybody changes. My wife and I have a very wonderful relationship, and I mean this deeply. And this goes both ways. You can ask her. She'll tell you the truth. If I wake up grumpy, she'll tolerate it for a while. If she wakes up grumpy, I'll tolerate it for a while. And then eventually we sit down, because what happens is when we wake up this way and we start acting this way, it affects the entirety of the house. Everybody starts acting in different ways than what they were originally. Why? Because you are influencing. Whether you know you're influencing or not, you're influencing. And every now and then she has to look at me and say, all right, we're going to stop this. What's your problem? And every now and then I stop and say, all right, what's your problem? We're going to have to get past this because I ain't doing this all day. And we both have that relationship. Guys, you have an influence on people. How you act, how you react, how you do things in your life influences people. And there are people in your life, just as Elisha was in the life of Elijah, he was placed in his life so that he may be an influence to Elisha and teach him everything he could teach him before he left this world. And so we arrive at verse 1 of chapter 2 of 2 Kings. And it says, it came to pass when the Lord would take up Elijah into heaven by a whirlwind, that Elijah went with Elisha from Gilgal. And Elisha said unto Elisha, tarry here, I pray thee, for the Lord has sent me to Bethel. Now, I love this part. This is what I love. It says, and Elisha said unto him, as the Lord liveth, and as thy soul liveth, I will not leave thee. So they went down to Bethel. This would happen 4 times. This would happen 4 different times. They would leave Gilgal, they would go to Bethel, from Bethel to Jericho, Jericho to Jordan. They went through all 4 of these locations, and every single time they were going to leave one, Elijah would look at Elisha and he'd say, you can stay. Stay here. Don't go with me. You stay here. And the reason why, guys, is because there was no mystery as to what was about to happen. Because everybody, if you go into the next verse, you'll find everybody kept coming over to Elisha, and the sons of the prophets, here we go, at Bethel came forth to Elisha and said unto him, Knowest thou that the Lord will take away thy master from thy head today? And he said, Yea, I know it. Hold your peace. In other words, hush, leave me alone. I know he's leaving, but leave me alone. Elijah knew, I'm leaving, but leave me alone. That was Elisha's thing, leave me alone. I'm going to follow you. Why? Because Elisha was growing where Elisha was planted. Elisha was growing where Elisha was planted. Guys, listen, there is no mystery here that Elijah came across Elisha because he was to be his successor. It is estimated to have been about a period of 7 to 8 years that they spent together. Everywhere Elijah went, this is no different. This is a picture of what went on for 7 to 8 years every day. Everywhere Elijah went, Elisha was on his heels. I mean, every step he took, here's this kid coming behind him. And listen, guys, I don't mean this to sound whatever, but you can't tell me they got along all the time. I mean, you know what I'm saying? You can't tell me that Elijah didn't get aggravated with the young guy and the young guy didn't get aggravated with the old guy. What I'm saying is just because you get hooked up with somebody you may not necessarily like all the time, don't mean you're in the wrong place. We are so quick to jump ship from where we've been put because, well, they did something I don't agree with. I didn't like the way they handled this situation. I wish they would do it this way. I wish they should have said it that way. They should have sung this song. They should have played the drums like this, and they should have strummed the guitar like that, and they should have sang it. Whatever it is, we got people getting all wrapped up going, well, I guess this just ain't my place because they just said something I didn't like. You don't tell me Elijah said everything, and Elisha was right behind him going, that's right, man, you tell him. No! There was times Elisha had questions. James chapter 5 verse 17 said Elijah was a man of like manner. He was a man, he had a nature of everybody else. He was a man. Elijah had issues, dude. I love that verse. He had some issues, man. And Elisha no doubt got to see those issues. Day up, sun up, to sundown, he was with him. And just because he didn't, and what I love is he knows Elijah's about to leave. He knows he's about to leave. And he's going with him anyways. Even though the outcome he knows is not going to be what he wants. Because while there may have been times where he didn't get along with him all the time, obviously we find out later in the story here, he loved him. He loved him. Bible says that when he did go up in the whirlwind, I'm not going to get ahead of myself too far here, but when he went up in the whirlwind, he cried out, my Father, my Father. He was such an influence on him that while he was not his physical father spiritually, Elijah was Elisha's father. He loved him. And even though he knew my father in the spirit is about to leave, I'm going with you. I ain't leaving. This is where I'm supposed to be. This is where I'm going to go. My goodness, why can't we be like that sometimes? We get so frustrated and tore up over tomorrow that we just can't help ourselves. Have you ever thought about how many verses there are about today? Have you ever given thought to that? Joshua would go in to say, choose you this day whom you shall serve. David would write, this is the day the Lord has made. Paul would write in 2 Corinthians, no, this is the day of salvation. Jesus in Matthew chapter 6 would tell his disciples, don't give thought for tomorrow. Tomorrow got enough worry for itself. Work with today. Notice what I said. Work with, not worry about today. I've heard that preached too. Don't worry about tomorrow, worry about today. No, don't worry about today, work with today. Don't be worrying about it, work with it. Listen, it ain't going to do you. Jesus himself said, how many of y'all can say you added anything to your life by worrying? You didn't do an ounce of good by worrying, work with it. Elisha had what he had, and he knew what he was getting ready to come into. That's what I love. I love that Elisha knew he was the next man up. He was going to be, for y'all out there who, I'm about to paint a picture in a minute, but for some of us out there, we think it's a place of prestige to have the name prophet tacked on your name. And I'm not saying that it ain't a big thing or it ain't a good thing. What I'm saying is that ain't all some people make it out to be. That ain't all glitz and glamour. It ain't all fun, sunshine and rainbows. They ain't just sitting somewhere on a cloud going, Lord, talk to me, and the Lord just whispering in their ears. No, that ain't how it goes. But Elijah's about to step up, and he's about to be the head dog here. He ain't worried about that. He ain't worried about that right now. What he's worried about is following who he's been placed with. If you don't understand where I'm coming from, I guarantee you if you'll listen to me for just a minute, you'll say you've had this happen in your life. Anybody out there listening, I'll guarantee you've had people come in and out of your life before without even realizing they came in and left. Have you ever been hooked up? Me and Sarah, we got talking about this one day. It was so funny. We was talking about people that we had come in contact with and how that we spent all this time together. We'd hang out. We'd have dinner with each other. We'd go to do events and all this stuff. We'd go to church together. Great time. Had a wonderful time. And we would talk all the time, have game nights and all this great stuff. And then it was like you woke up and it had been 6 months and you hadn't talked to them. And you sat down and you're like, what happened? Well, there wasn't a falling out. Wasn't nobody got mad at nobody. Wasn't nobody said, well, you... No, it wasn't nothing like that. It was just, what happened? Why did that happen? Because God had them in your life for that moment, for that season, for a reason. And God had you in their life for a reason and for that season. They were coming into your life because God had something in them you needed, and you had something in you they needed, and you worked well with each other, and when everything settled and you got what you needed, you dispersed. And we don't like the disbursement part, but that comes with it. That comes with it. And sometimes we come in and out of people's lives and we don't understand. You ever had friends you wondered how in the world you become friends with? I mean, seriously, you ever sit down talking to somebody and be like, how in the world did this happen? I mean, I would have never, there's people I talk to sometimes, I'm like, I would have never guessed in a million years I'd be sitting here talking to you. You know? I mean, it just is. It's not that I don't like them, it's just we're different. And I've been attached to people that are way different than me. And I'm like, and it eats you up, don't it? You don't like it because I don't care who you are, how holy you think you are. You want people who agree with you and who are like you. I mean, come on, let's just be real about this whole thing. You know it's true. I know it's true too. Type amen. I don't care if it hurts. You know it's true. We want people like us. And it don't always work out that way. It don't always work out that way. People don't always do what you want them to. I must be on the right track or I'm about to say the wrong thing. I'm not sure. It's thundering here. I don't know what it's doing where you're at. You know, I'm either doing real good or I need to sit down. I'm not sure. But Elisha is following Elijah every step. And he's going with Elijah because that's where he's been placed to go. And for the time that he's in, he's doing what he's called to do. The Bible speaks many times, just as I was talking about Jesus saying, give no thought for tomorrow because tomorrow has cares enough for itself. God is telling his people through Jesus in that moment saying, you take and work with today, I'll worry about tomorrow. If that's the case and we are meant to work with today, why are we fighting over tomorrow? We are living in a world right now, I don't know if anybody's noticed this or not, but we're living in a world that is so consumed with tomorrow. I mean, seriously, you don't believe me? Check your Facebook status. How many people do you see griping about the current situation and looking forward to next week when things get back to normal? How many people right now are waiting until next month when I can go and do the normal stuff? I keep doing this because I got news for you, Jack. Normal ain't coming back. I'm sorry. I don't know. It may have burst everybody's bubble. I may have burst your bubble, and you may not like it, and you may exit off right now. I have no idea. But normal ain't coming back. Your version of normal has changed. Your version of normal my version of normal has changed. I'm not saying ain't nothing going to be like it was. What I'm saying, though, is, guys, we're coming into a new normal. We're coming into a new world. This thing, you don't have situations like this. You don't have people coming up here singing and preaching to empty seats for months, for weeks at a time, and not have something change. I mean, it don't work that way. But we're all so consumed about tomorrow. And I'm here to tell you, by God's word, that ain't God's will that you worry about tomorrow. If you're worried about tomorrow, you're in the wrong mindset. You're in the wrong mindset. Look at it like this. I love gauges. I don't know about anybody else. I love gauges in the Bible. I love being able to lay something down and say, okay, how do I measure up next to this? Nope, I'm in the wrong. Okay, I need to step over here. I love being able to do that. Let me give you a fun little tidbit. Flip everything. Flip everything in the Bible. If you want to know what God's will is, look at what the will of Satan is and flip it. That's God's will. Let me give you, for instance, Jesus makes a statement. He says, Satan came, we all know this one, Satan came but to do what? To steal, kill, and destroy. That is Satan's will. Perfect, right? I'm hoping we learn something. That's Satan's will right there. Those three things, steal, kill, destroy. If that's Satan's will, then what's God's will? Flip it. What's the opposite of stealing? Restoration. What's the opposite of killing? Resurrecting and reviving. What's the opposite of destruction? Creation. You see what I'm saying? Flip it. So if you're sitting there finding all these verses saying, work with today, and you're worried about tomorrow, you're not in God's will by worrying about tomorrow. Work with today. Elisha wasn't worried about what was coming tomorrow. He knew, or what was coming 15, 20 minutes, however long. He was following Elijah. And the Bible says that they come down to Jordan. I love this because I'm about to get to the verse that God gave to me. God gave me one verse. That's all He gave me. He gave me one verse, and I sat down and thought, what in the world am I going to do with that, and how does that fit? And He made it fit. How about that? Ain't that something? He says that they come down to the Jordan, and the Bible says that Elijah, he rolled up his mantle. He rolled it up, this is verse 8, struck the water, and it was divided this way and that, so that the two of them crossed over on dry ground. So Elijah has taken his mantle off, and he rolls it up, and he smites the water parts that walk over on dry ground. The next verse, it says, and so it was when they had crossed over that Elijah said to Elisha, ask what may I do for you before I am taken away from you. I love that. He's like, what would you have me do? Man, let me tell you, guys, well, I ain't going to get him that mind. We got to have communication with one another. We got to be able to sit down with one another and say, what do you need? What's going on? What do you need from me? What can I do for you? And we need to be able and be willing to do it. We need to be willing to not just look at somebody and say, I'll pray for you, and walk off and not pray for them. When we do that sometimes. I ain't going to get into that. But it says, Elisha said, I love what Elisha says. I love Elisha. I love this guy. This guy's so bold. Man, listen to this guy. It says, and Elisha said, I pray thee, let a double portion of thy spirit be upon me. Go to verse 10. I love this one too. And he said, thou hast asked a hard thing. Now listen to me. I want you to pay attention because we're getting down to the nitty-gritty of this. We're about to get down where the rubber meets the road. We're going to get serious about this thing, okay? I want you to notice what's going on right here. Elisha has been with Elijah for 7 to 8 years, okay? Remember how I said the office of a prophet isn't always sunshine and rainbows? While we look at the highlights of Elijah, and we look at his accomplishments, and we're like, man, this guy was there. And while Elisha wasn't with him at the prophets of Baal situation, no doubt he knew about the prophets of Baal situation. And here we've got this mighty man of God who dries up the heavens, and then 3.5 years later, he calls down rain. This guy who builds an altar, pours buckets of water around it in a drought, and then calls down fire from heaven. And I mean, all this miraculous wild stuff is the same guy that ran for his life when a woman threatened him. Now, don't get me wrong. I kind of understand. I mean, I've had some women mad at me before, and I thought I better run. And I did. Mom caught me. But listen, Elijah, he ran for his life, and he was down by a brook being fed by a raven, and he went to a cave by himself. He wasn't always in the spotlight, and it wasn't always grand, and it wasn't always pleasant. Again, we're back to James 5. He was a man of our nature, a man of like nature. This guy had issues, and Elisha said, I want double what you got. This is also the same man who not only had a responsibility to speak to people as God told him to, he also was the one that when kings come and said, should we go to war, he was the one who gave the final say. Listen, I don't know, let me put that in perspective for you. Entire nations' futures lied in the balance of this man's word and willingness to speak what God told him to say. Now, you put that into perspective for just a second, and I don't know about you, but I don't know that I really want double what he got. You know what I'm saying? And that's what, when Elijah says, you've asked a hard thing, he ain't being arrogant. He ain't looking at him saying, boy, I don't think you could fill these shoes. That ain't what he's doing. He ain't getting arrogant. He's saying, you're asking hard stuff, bub. You asking stuff that you probably don't fully comprehend, but if you want it. And he tells him, he said, if you're there when I'm taken up, it's yours. If you're there when I'm taken up, it's yours. We're winding down. The Bible says in verse 12, see here, Got too far ahead of myself. Verse 11. Then it happened as they continued on and talked that suddenly a chariot of fire appeared with horses of fire and separated the two of them, and Elijah went up by a whirlwind into heaven. Verse 12 says, and Elisha saw it, and he cried out, my father, the chariot of Israel and its horsemen. So he saw him no more, and he took hold of his own clothes and tore them into two pieces. He also took up the mantle of Elijah that had fallen from him and went back and stood by the bank of Jordan. Elisha has done great. I mean, this guy is a perfect picture of abide where you're put, stick with where you're at. I'm not saying don't have a vision. God gives us all vision. God's given me vision. I have a vision for my life. But let me go ahead and tell you, there are times